I have been told that I have a choice in life about what I want to do and how I want to live it. And for me, being a lesbian was part of that choice.
I was emotionally oriented towards men from as far back as I can remember. It's not something that I chose.
No, I'm a transsexual trainee, but I sort of fit more in with the sort of female role. But, you know, I don't think of myself as gay.
I guess most people don't know quite what to make of Christy, or even Vicky or Jim, for that matter. Tonight's program looks at what makes them different from the sexual majority. I'm glad you could join me. Guardians of public morality often lament the amount of attention given by the media to the homosexual community. But that media interest clearly reflects a wider curiosity. When the ABC ignored the protests of 90 federal MPs recently and televised highlights of Sydney's gay and lesbian Mardi Gras, nearly 2 million people tuned in, one of the largest audiences the ABC has ever had. The fascination with homosexuality and gay lifestyles might suggest that our sexual orientation is less certain than many think. Yet ask just what makes someone homosexual. Is it genetic, family influence, or social conditioning perhaps? And the gay community worries about motives. The tragedy of AIDS has made it essential that we understand our sexual and especially our homosexual behaviour. And as Jonathan Holmes discovered, much of this research is now being done by gay men and lesbians.
One to come out. I was number 2 in a series of 4 brothers, and I watched them come out and questioned what was happening, and I think I decided to come out away from home rather than in front of my mother.
Do you sometimes wish that your sons hadn't been gay?
At least one anyway. Would have been nice, yes.
The number of tragic deaths the Lloyd family has had to bear is exceptional. But it's not unusual for homosexuality to run in families. Indeed, for most of this century, the prevailing explanation for homosexuality has centered on the family. The relationship between son and father, father and daughter, mother and son.
Have a look at this one, Mum.
From the meager residue of Ken Lloyd's life, his family pick out the relics of their own past.
Oh, look.
I couldn't believe it. Yes, it's me when I was a little girl. Fencing blown it up. Me and my brother.
This is a really old one as well, look.
Sigmund Freud believed that the desire of men for men and women for women was a subconscious response to deep currents of love and hostility running through the reefs of the nuclear family. Always there, seldom acknowledged. Was there a time when they came and talked to you about it?
No.
They never did?
No, they never did.
But did they know that you knew?
Possibly, but never, you know, we never discussed it.
So you had all these 4 children, these 4 sons, either gay or transsexual, but you never sat down and really talked it through with them. What do you think about that, though, now? Well, how do you feel about it?
I think they were born this way. It wasn't anything to do with the way they were brought up, because They were happy, you know, and it was a good family.
To Freud and his disciples, that would have been a classic denial of subconscious feelings. But in recent years, Freudian analysis has come to seem to many a clumsy and obsolete vehicle, especially compared with the slick modern certainties of molecular biology.
Every week, it seems now, we're told of a new gene that, at least in part, determines why we are the way we are. Perhaps the most controversial of these discoveries is one of the most recent, the so-called gay gene.
Dr. Dean Hamer of the National Cancer Institute in Washington, D.C., is a geneticist who happens to be gay himself. Last June, he had a paper published in the prestigious journal Science. It was one of those rare pieces of research which fires the imagination of the non-scientific world.
We made two findings. The first was that being gay tends to cluster in families. That is, gay men, for example, have many more gay brothers than do heterosexual men.
That much was already known. But Hamer and his team went further by looking at the wider families of 76 gay men. On the father's side, the researchers found there were no more gay men on average than you'd expect in a randomly selected group. But on the mother's side, there were significantly more, especially among maternal uncles and the sons of maternal aunts. If there was a line of inheritance, it had travelled through mothers to sons. It's a pattern which cries out to any geneticist to look at the X chromosome, which is inherited by male babies only from their mothers.
30 or 40 or 50 different pairs of brothers.
So Hamer and his colleagues recruited 38 pairs of gay brothers.
I'm going to turn my head. That's fine. So
They, and where possible, their mothers and heterosexual brothers, gave blood from which the scientists extracted samples of DNA.
Want a good Band-Aid? Yeah, I think so. Put it up. There we go. This is an X-ray film of a DNA marker gel. And
Using chemical signals, which geneticists call markers, the team was able to identify a small region of the X chromosome, which was shared by most of the gay brothers.
Because the gay brothers shared this region much more often than did heterosexual brothers, we think that that part of the chromosome contains a gene that influences their sexual orientation. You're next.
No. Here you go.
The evidence is greater than 99% confident that there is such a genetic link.
But Hamer is not claiming that all homosexual men will have the gene. Quite the contrary.
But you have to realize that we studied a very special population. We actually selected out families that tended to look like there was a genetic factor. In the population at large, the gene could play a role in a much smaller percentage of people, perhaps more in the range of about 15%.
And even among those men who do have the gene, says Hamer, there'll be some who don't end up behaving in a homosexual way.
Many people have the idea that genes are destiny, and that genes are some sort of master puppeteers that are jerking our strings, sexual and otherwise. And that's a very incorrect view of how genes act. Actually, genes may influence behavior. They may tend to make a certain person in a certain way. But because we're human, we have a consciousness, and we have a lot of other influences on our behavior. So we don't think that this gene makes a person gay in the same way that a gene makes your eyes blue or makes your eyes green. It's a much more complicated and also much more interesting situation than that.
Passion.
If any pair of men are likely to find that they share the gay gene, it's publican Tim and his twin brother Jonathan.
Can you run it over to pizza stuffing? Sure, no problem.
Not only are they both gay, but so are 3 of their 5 brothers and sisters. Do you think that your homosexuality might be because of a gene?
Never been really, it's not ever been something I've ever thought about until recent publicity, I suppose. Just something that I've always been, really, and just a part of me.
The information that's come out through that is only really confirming what I've always known my entire life. It's to me, being gay is a completely natural thing, you know, so it's not something I've had to struggle with personally, and I know Tim's been the same, you know.
This calm indifference to the origins of their homosexuality is shared by most of the regulars at the Stronghold Bar in Sydney's Surrey Hills. These are no adolescent boys struggling to understand their sexual longings. They're mature men, most of whom long since stopped asking themselves what made them the way they are.
They've travelled the world. They've had, in many instances, enormous sexual appetite and enormous sexual experience. They've partied hard and lived hard. Now they realise that the sexual thing is dominant for some part of your life, but it's not the be-all and end-all of your life.
But for some men here, the question, what made me gay, is still of burning importance.
From my own experience, I know that I was emotionally oriented towards men from as far back as I can remember. It's not something that I chose. It's something that was part of me.
Jim Malcolm is now an openly gay man, living with other men in inner-city Sydney. But he was brought up a Catholic boy on the New South Wales south coast. He reached this haven only after a struggle which has inflicted enormous pain on himself and on those he loves.
For me, growing up as a Catholic, was in a very conservative background, I defined myself as sinful, as bad. A notion that this thing inside me is not right. It's not okay. I must not be this. I must not be who I am.
In his early 20s, after adolescent homosexual experiments, Jim Malcolm got married.
I got married because I was in love with the person I married, and she was in love with me. My sexuality was alien, it was foreign, it was stigma, it was bad. And I wanted to be like everybody else. But there was a sense of being forever concerned about who would find out, what would know, when I would slip, what people could see inside me. I've always, and it wasn't even making a slip, it was people can tell. It was living a life of fear, of constant anxiety and depression.
Finally, after more than 10 years of marriage, Jim Malcolm decided to leave his wife and children and come out as a gay man.
It's, I think, impossible to convey to an individual who hasn't lived through that the pain, the anguish, and the trauma that's involved in doing it. I think it's part of where my own feelings about that my sexuality is something that is inside me. It's not something that's given to me.
By profession, Jim Malcolm is an academic psychologist.
Oh, this is Gamma. Can I help you?
Much of his spare time is spent on the telephone for Gamma, the Gay and Married Men's Association, where he listens to other stories as tortured as his own.
We're a group of men who, at some stage or another, have been married. Most of the men in Gamma would make similar sorts of remarks, that their sexuality was something that was fundamental and basic to them, that most of them have striven most of their life to hide, to suppress, but it will out for them.
If the sexuality of men like Jim Malcolm does turn out to be linked to their genes, it would help explain their desires not just to themselves, but to their families. But the genetic research strikes many other gay men and lesbians as sinister.
Oh, well, I think that's just a bit scary, really. You know, for me, it's akin to fascism.
I mean, the history clearly has been that when scientists have tried to find some biological cause for homosexuality, the agenda has really been, how can we eradicate it? I think there is a very large concern, which very many people share, has nothing really to do with your sexuality, about genetic engineering, about the possibility of using this sort of research then to change people and indeed maybe to abort people.
There's nothing fanciful about the fear that if a gay gene were located, it could be screened for early in pregnancy. There'd be little to stop a mother requesting the abortion of a fetus with the gene. Dean Hamer openly admits that the risk exists.
In some countries, for example, in India, that same technique has now been used to abort children or fetuses because they're going to be females. That's dreadful. I think that we should do everything possible to stop it. But you have to realize that the reason that those children are being aborted is not because of the technology, it's because of prejudice against females. And it's also important to recognize that 10 years ago, people in the same culture simply waited until the child was born and then killed the newborn. So it's not the technology that is driving prejudice, it's prejudice itself.
The Reverend Chuck McElhenney and his wife and helpmeet Donna are visiting Australia from California at the invitation of Fred Nile's Festival of Light. According to Sydney's gay newspaper, the Star Observer, they are spearheading a holy war on gays. But the turnout for their advertised rally in Melbourne was disappointing. No more than 60 true believers had decided to spend their Saturday evening in the Ringwood Gospel Chapel.
Welcome to Chuck and Donna McElhenney.
The Reverend McElhenney is the minister of a small fundamentalist congregation in the gay stronghold of San Francisco. He and Donna have written a book entitled When the Wicked Seize the City.
In San Francisco, and that is the gay agenda has literally taken over the mindset of what's going on in that beautiful, lovely city that we have.
As the Reverend McElhenney sees it, it is he, his family, and his church which are the objects of harassment and intolerance.
With what the Bible says, the Bible's real clear about that. Homosexuality is sin.
It all started back in 1978 when McElhenney sacked his church organist because he was an unapologetic gay.
8 days later, I got a letter from his attorney, from the gay rights advocates, which basically said, you have been sued. I called him back, the attorney back, and I said to him, listen, you don't sue motherhood apple pie of the church. How can you sue the church? And sue the church on this particular issue. Now, a lot of churches may deserve to be sued, but not this particular historic moral issue of homosexuality.
Some gay organizations, especially in America, hope that the gene theory will prove a potent weapon against the Christian soldiers of anti-homosexual fundamentalism. If homosexuality is an inherited characteristic, like left-handedness or white skin, how can the churches continue to consider it a sin? But that argument doesn't impress the Reverend Chuck. For him, the only Christian homosexual is one who abstains from sex.
There's no way a scientific study on genetics deals with the issue of morality. The Bible says whether it's genetic or not, it's still an act is itself sinful. And if this genetic study goes on to presume, therefore, because I am born this way, I cannot help myself, that opens up such a can of worms that everybody can say that about anything. I deal with philandering husbands who make the same argument. I deal with pedophiles, too, that molest children. Where are you going to draw the line? And what I'm arguing as a theologian, as a Christian, is once you throw out God's law as presuppositional, even to scientific studies, then the lid is off.
Last year, Pope John published the papal bull, The Splendor of Truth. It condemned homosexuality in almost exactly the same terms.
You were both brought up as Catholics. Do you think that if it were confirmed that most gay men, and for that matter lesbians, have inherited that would in any way change the attitude of, for example, the Catholic Church?
Not until they learn to live in the real world. And as indicative by what the Pope has recently said, it's at the moment is light years away.
Some people say that this type of finding is very good for gay rights.
Even the author of the gay gene research is doubtful that it will lead to any political benefits for gays and lesbians.
I'm not that optimistic because I think that homophobia, like any phobia, is an irrational fear and that it's not based on science or logic of any sort. It's based on prejudice and misunderstanding.
But Dean Hamer is undeterred. Funding for research into breast cancer is now allowing him to pursue the lesbian as well as the gay male gene.
Women are just as important as men, and certainly just as interesting. And we've been studying a large group of families with 2 or more lesbians in them for some time now.
But however keen the biologists may be to pursue the hunt for the gay gene, there's fierce skepticism in other disciplines. Historians and sociologists argue that this whole genetic approach is fundamentally flawed. It assumes that there is now and always has been a minority of people who are clearly homosexual, and of course a majority who are clearly heterosexual. But they say that simply doesn't gel with the way that human beings actually behave.
If you look anthropologically and historically, the evidence is that human sexuality is very fluid, that it takes different forms under different conditions, and that very many people in the course of a lifetime have very different sexual feelings and experiences. And this attempt to impose very clear dichotomies on sexual behaviour, which biologists and Christians share alike, seems to me just silly.
In classical Greece and Rome, for instance, the social rules allowed free male citizens to choose adolescent youths as sex partners. The evidence is that the vast majority of men did just that, before going on to marry women and father families later in life. For a part of their lives, they were mainly homosexual. For the rest of it, mainly heterosexual.
We can see that there's a range of behaviours, sexual behaviours that people are capable of. And what we see as gay and lesbian and heterosexual is much more of a wavy line than we once might have thought.
In Australian prisons today, many men engage in homosexual acts. And not just because there are no women. Young men seek protection from older men. Strong men gain prestige by becoming the protectors and the sex partners of desirable younger men. Most of those who are homosexual inside prison would be heterosexual outside.
I think there's a very substantial proportion of the Australian male population who at some time in their lives have had sexual activity with their own sex.
Gary Dowsett is a research fellow at Macquarie University who's been working on the prevention of the spread of AIDS. He's convinced that male homosexual activity in Australia is far more common than we realise.
It's quite important that we understand the breadth and complexity of sexual behaviour between men in this country, where the epidemic is still largely related to homosexual transmission of the virus, that we don't just simply go to where we think gay people are, but we go to where we think the sex is happening, and they're not necessarily the same thing.
The experience of Christy McNichol illustrates the startling fluidity of sexual behaviour in Australia today. She was born a male baby and raised as a boy.
Good morning. Good evening. How are you? Good.
10 years of hormone treatment have given her a body that fits her own image of the person she has always felt she really is.
Not Madonna. You like that show? We wear nothing.
But she hasn't undergone the complex and painful surgery that would change her genitalia from male to female. Probably she never will.
Yes, sir.
You know, I'll probably never be 100% woman, but just think of myself as an individual. I'm happy, and that's all that really matters.
Would you describe yourself as gay? Is that a word you'd use about yourself?
No, I'm a transsexual trainee, but I sort of fit more in with the sort of female role. But, you know, I don't think of myself as gay.
And you wouldn't be attracted to gay men. You'd be attracted to straight men, basically.
Oh, both.
You're so fine, and you're mine, and yours till the end time.
Tonight, Christy is doing her Madonna routine in a mainly gay club in the far western suburbs of Sydney. But she frequently performs at straight venues too. It's not surprising with a body like hers that she gets plenty of approaches from apparently straight men. What is surprising is what those men mostly seem to want.
Have you found that they wanted to treat you as a woman or not?
No, they want to experiment like gay sex, but they're too, they could never probably go off with, you know, just a man that dresses as a man, but they could go off with us because there's sort of still that, you know, female look, but, you know, you've sort of got the goods that they're after, and, yeah, they want to explore, they want to have gay sex. It's just a curiosity thing.
So they want to make sure, in fact, that you aren't all women.
They want to make sure you've got all the bits, yeah.
And what sort of sex are they mostly looking for?
Gay sex performed on them.
So they want to be at the receiving end, as it were? Anal sex?
Yes.
Did that surprise you at first?
Yeah, I thought I went to all this trouble. Yeah, I was very surprised, but that's just the way it is. I'm still trying to work it out.
And you'd say that would be the majority of men that approach you?
90%.
90%?
Mm.
Do you think that those people, those men, would still describe themselves as straight men?
Yes. And to them, because they've been with you, they've been with a woman, but they don't want to analyse, you know, anything. Just in their head, they've been with a woman, but they've sort of got what they wanted, what they're after, you know, that exploring thing.
So they can still say to themselves they've been with a woman, even though what they've experienced is something they couldn't possibly experience with a woman.
Yeah. Whereas if they were to go off with a man, it would be just too, they'd be too freaked out about the whole thing.
But all over Australia, in coastal cities and country towns, in the sleepiest, most respectable suburbs, there are men who are not so coy. In secluded spots in public parks, or the bush behind quiet beaches, or the public toilets of multi-storey car parks within the busiest shopping malls of our great cities. These places are known to the subculture as beats. Places where men meet with other men for brief, anonymous sex. One view is that most of these men are repressed homosexuals, desperate and unhappy.
I think beats provide for some men in some social settings and in a place where they can at least not be alone. The expression of their sexuality in those places, I think, is often not healthy or helpful for them, that it's genitally focused, that many men use beats for years and years and years and never ever communicate with another person. And their homosexuality, again, becomes associated with all sorts of negative feelings of guilt and...
A lot of them are not very nice places, after all.
No, they're not. They're not at all.
But some beats are in very beautiful places. And there's another view of beat users, too. Daniel Madadoo is head of the Illawarra office of ACON, the AIDS Council of New South Wales. As a result of the epidemic, we know far more about the kind of men who use beats than we ever did before.
No, they're not. I mean, this potentially could be a beat. I mean, it offers an ideal spot. It's anonymous. It's away from the hustle and bustle of the main city. It offers a place for people to walk around, to actually check each other out beforehand. It has bushes where people could actually go to.
In a city the size of Wollongong, there may be as many as 50 recognised beats. In the capital cities, there are hundreds. For years, full-time outreach workers employed by ACON have been visiting the beats to pass on information about safe sex.
It's only 40% of the men that they speak with that might identify as being gay. 60% of those men would call themselves straight, primarily, or would call themselves something else. The fact that their behaviour is that they're having sex with another man doesn't enter their minds in terms of an identity of sexuality.
A lot of straight people would assume that if they're married and they've got kids and they're going to these places, that they're actually really repressed homosexuals and may be very unhappy about it. Is that necessarily the case?
No, it's not. I mean, a lot of these men, it may be a one-off encounter. They may not be repressed. They might be quite fine with the fact that they're having casual sex with another man, but then they have this other life, and it's not a problem for them. It's not problematic, that it's quite balanced and it's okay for them.
We found many of the men who are interested in that kind of sexual activity aren't interested in becoming gay. It's not as if they're just in the closet or they haven't worked out their sexuality. The circumstances of their life mean that this is the best compromise they can make. Sexual activity occasionally with men in places where they find it readily without having to go through other more complicated processes like going to a bar or dance.
So we can't assume that all the men who use beats are driven by an inborn genetic compulsion. For some of them, it's just another form of sexual gratification. We shouldn't assume either that the men and women who choose to come out openly as gay and lesbian all feel that they were born homosexual, that in some sense they can't help their sexual orientation. Some gay men and many more lesbians don't feel that way at all.
Desire for me was something that I felt, you know, at times I felt it for women, at times I felt it for men. More predominantly I felt it for women, but for me it's very hard to say that that was because I was biologically constructed that way or because of that I felt that I could be the person I wanted to be within the gay community.
Enjoy yourself and shop, 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 teardrop! All right! Only a shadow, she starts tripping firelight, jumps in the trees, flying across the right of way. Silvery morning, it goes by but she don't stop till we're riding that away.
It's a Saturday morning in February, the month of the Mardi Gras festival.
Get up on your high horse now.
And the gay and lesbian community is out in force and in style. Far more than the straight world, the gay community allows its members to appear in any guise they like. From drag queens to muscle men, city slickers to boot scooters. Despite the shadow of AIDS, there's no denying that Sydney's gay men and lesbians have fun. Overwhelmingly, they're middle class, well-educated, well-paid. They've few responsibilities, no children soaking up the budget.
Yeah, me too. She was at the funeral yesterday. Was she? And I said, hi, Tanya. Yes, darling. How's your little show going? Oh.
Vicky Spence and Tala Bonoff are two young lesbians who insist that the existence of a gay community had a powerful influence on them. Tala grew up a country girl.
I didn't know any lesbians, and it wasn't until I actually came to school in Sydney that I realised there was a whole life out there that belonged to that community. Not only lesbian community, but the gay community. I guess it was more common to see the gay men's community, but definitely the women's scene evolved. I was about 17.
As for Vicky Spence, raised in the plush, conventional North Shore suburbs of Sydney, the alternative lifestyle just south of the harbour became increasingly attractive as she grew up.
Seeing a gay community probably didn't, of course, make the decision for me. Like I made the choice from having had affairs with women and affairs with men, and I realised that sexually I was far more compatible with women. But along with that was the fact that I was much more suited to the gay community. That's where I wanted to live. That's where I felt myself.
Gay and lesbian community that can attract 1,500 people to a swimming carnival has got the strength of numbers. And more, its members don't feel the need to find reasons or excuses for being what they are. Vicky Spence is a tough-minded competitor. In her teens, she swam at interstate and even at international level. She's not the sort of woman to hide behind a scientific theory which enables her to plead, "It's not my fault, I can't help being a lesbian."
I chose to be a lesbian. I chose to live within the gay community. I chose, as an adult, to create myself into the person that I am today. For me, a well-educated, middle-class, white, European, human being, I have been told that I have a choice in life about what I want to do and how I want to live it. And for me, being a lesbian was part of that choice.
Mark, set.
Dr. John Hart is a social scientist and director of the Australian Centre for Gay and Lesbian Research at Sydney University. He believes that for most people, sexual orientation is fluid. It's social structures that determine our behaviour.
If we offer more opportunities for different kinds of lifestyles, people are going to take them up. So in the future, we might in fact see more people identifying as sexually different and not so many people identifying as straight.
And that's not because of a gene or because a Freudian relationship with their mum?
Or any interaction of those two factors. No, indeed. That is because of the kind of society that we are creating, which is more tolerant of diversity.
Most gay men I've talked to have said, the only choice I had was whether to repress my real sexuality or to come out and admit it. Are you saying that actually there are more choices than that available, or should be, or...?
I think that people should choose choice. I think that anything else is a denial of their humanity.
Until recently, only the most hardline opponents of gay liberation argued that people could choose or could be persuaded to be homosexual. Now, the most radical gay thinkers agree with the fundamentalist Christians that the gay lifestyle may be contagious.
What I'm saying is that in some ways, if you present an attractive lifestyle, you can well be seen as converting people. And that we shouldn't hide behind, oh, there's only a small percentage of us, or people aren't affected by good role models. Of course they're affected by good role models. We all are.
That's just simply to say, when the incestuous group becomes more visible and accepted and open, won't there be more people doing acts of incest? Well, of course they will.
The sheer numbers that turn out to enjoy the Mardi Gras parade, and the even greater numbers right around the country who watched it on television, certainly suggests that attitudes, especially among the young, have changed.
They know how to party and they know how to have a good time, and they don't judge everybody, and they don't try and pick fights, and they don't, you know, it's like they're just who they are. They're their own person, you know.
I think there should be more coverage of gay culture throughout the year rather than just this once.
Why is that?
Because it exists throughout the year, not just this month. It exists every day throughout the year.
But attitudes are one thing, behaviour is another. To those in the gay community still fighting legal discrimination in every state in Australia, it seems positively irresponsible to claim that straight people might be choosing to be gay. That sort of talk can only play into the hands of their enemies.
I really think that people either feel homosexual feelings or don't, and if they do, then it's good that they have other role models and they have the opportunity to live a life where they're being true to themselves. I don't for a minute think that it's about people who really are heterosexuals suddenly feeling driven to be homosexuals because, you know, they wear nice clothes and look attractive and have good parties. I mean, I just don't think that will happen.
We've got a head down the back.
Stevie is co-convener of the New South Wales Gay and Lesbian Rights Lobby.
We want to try and brainstorm as many case studies to actually illustrate the problems people face.
The theme of this year's Mardi Gras parade was We Are Family. And behind the scenes, the lobby is working on some very real problems for gay and lesbian couples.
And I don't think people are fully aware of how much suffering happens when your lover dies and you're treated as invisible.
That's what really appalled me most of all, finding out that you can't even get the last effects they had with them when they went into hospital, no matter how long you've lived together and been in a relationship.
Compared with these kinds of concrete issues, the question, why are people homosexual, seems to many gays and lesbians to be of no importance.
I mean, how many times do you wake up in the morning and say, why is it that I'm heterosexual? You know, you don't question that you're heterosexual. Why is it that everyone wants us to question why we're homosexual? I don't understand that logic, and it's not important to me. What's important to me is how I live my life and how much I'm discriminated against in trying to achieve equality for myself and the rest of the people in my community.
The author of the gay gene research justifies his work on the grounds of pure intellectual curiosity.
What we're trying to do is to get some of how sexuality is controlled in the brain and how genes and the environment and perhaps other factors like culture and even society contribute to a person's sexual behavior.
But society and culture and environment and genes don't make a neat scientific package. Human behavior, in all its astonishing diversity, tends to resist attempts to lock it into categories. The Mardi Gras parade is over. The gays are still vulnerable to violent young men and condemned as sinners by the churches and unable to kiss or to hold hands except among their own kind. But attitudes have changed and are still changing. Perhaps before we've learned why some people are more attracted to their own sex than the other, we'll have learned to take the view that it doesn't really matter.
Jonathan Holmes reporting, and that's all from Four Corners for this week. I hope you'll join me again same time next Monday night, 8:30. Until then, good night.